Well, it is great to have all of you with us today. My name is Chris. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're in this series titled Be Life Unleashed. And I think by the time we get to part 4 of the series, the title of the series is going to make more sense. It's going to become more clear. But before we jump into part 2 today, I want to highlight something that's coming up over a year from now, November of 2019, I'm leading a group of people on it's not vacation, it's not a trip, it's an experience of a lifetime. And we're actually going to be going through the footsteps of the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, we're going to talk about him today. He is the person God tapped on the shoulders. And the church that we know of it today is because Paul's life intersected with Jesus, and God said, I want you to be the voice to take the message of Jesus outside of this Jewish nation, this Jewish culture, to the entire world. And so we're going to be going through some of the key places where Paul went, some of the cities where he launched churches, some of the letters that are found in our New Testament. We're going to be in Israel as well. And here's the thing, if you've never been to the Holy Land or some of these parts of the world, I'm telling you, when you go there, the Bible comes alive in ways that is so hard to describe. My first time ever going to the Holy Land, I was sitting on this hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. It's where Jesus taught. And I remember sitting there, and all of a sudden, everything came into focus on why Jesus taught and how he taught and the words he taught. I mean, it was one of those experiences. And so I just want to encourage all of you. I mean, I know like this is over a year away and there's a lot of life and there's some cost to this, but I'm telling you, spiritually, man, it could just change everything for you. And so you can go on tcconline.info, and we have our brochure there. You can download that. You can get all the details. You can message us. We can give you more details. Again, November 2019 is one of those bucket list experiences. So check it out, check it out, check it out. Well, we're in part 2 of the series, Be Life Unleashed. And what we're going to do is we're kind of looking at these phrases that if you've been around Tri-County Church for any length of time, you've heard us use these phrases that when Jesus is the subject of your life, we're to love like Jesus loved, we're to live like he lived, we're to lead like he led, and we're to leave behind what Jesus left behind, which is more people to love, live, and lead like Jesus loved, lived, and led. And those statements are catchy and memorable. Even if this is your first time hearing these phrases, already you have them memorized. But we want them to be more than just catchy and memorable and gimmicky phrases. Because here's the thing. When Jesus is the subject of your life, you are to love, live, and lead like Jesus loved, lived, and led. I mean, that's a call for all of our lives. And so one of the things we want to do in this series is to remove the question marks, because these phrases beg us to ask the question, well, what does it mean? Right? What does it mean to love like Jesus loved? What does it mean to live like he lived? What does it mean to lead like he led? And what does it mean? So last week we removed the question mark and we just simply said this: love first. Jesus gave us the new command, an innovative command, a fresh way of looking at things. So love everyone. So we just simply say, we are going to just love first in every interaction. And so part 2 today, we're going to be removing the question mark for what does it mean to live like Jesus lived. If you've been around any type of religious structure, you know when it comes to how am I supposed to live within this religious framework, you're now talking about rules, right? All religions, no matter what the religion is, right, is filled with rules. And if you grew up going to any type of church, no matter the denomination, doesn't matter the denomination, you know there's rules attached to church. For some of you, you left church because you broke a rule. And maybe you left on your own, or maybe you got escorted out, or maybe you got stared out. You know what I mean? Like you walked in, you're like, oh, everyone knows, right? You found yourself going to the store and church people just stared at you. Church people turned and walked the other way. People that used to return your text messages no longer returned. Right? So some of you know, and some of you taking the step back into church at Tri-County. You're just waiting. You're like, okay, this church feels different than other churches, but I'm just waiting for the hammer of rules to come crashing down. The thing about rules is, it's not a church thing. It's not a religion thing. I mean, it is. But higher than church and religion, it's a people thing. It just is. There's something about people, us people, and rules. This week, I Googled a simple question. I thought the answer was going to be simple. The question was this: how many laws are there in the United States? I thought I would get a really big number that I could put up on the screen, a really big number. And I had no idea how big. I mean, maybe it was billions or trillions or quadrillions. I didn't know the size, but I was like, I knew the number was going to be big. And so when I Googled that question, how many laws are there in the United States, hit send. And we're a young country, by the way, a really young country compared to the rest of the world's countries. I expected to find the number. And guess what I discovered? No one knows. There are so many laws and rules and sub-laws of laws and sub-laws of laws and sub-laws. No one knows how many laws we have in this country. No one does. I mean, I thought I was going to be scared with the number that I was going to discover. I'm now more petrified because no one knows. So I started at the state level. I'm like, well, okay, maybe on the state level we can find a number. Just give me a number. Guess what? I couldn't find it at the state level. Now I'm more petrified. But as I made my way through, I started to discover some really hilarious laws out there. Real laws that are written down that if you break these laws, like you could get arrested laws. For instance, if you find yourself in Arkansas, and it's late at night, and you're like, man, I'm really hungry. And you get in your car, and you drive your car to a place that sells cold drinks and sandwiches. I'm not joking, those two items. You pull into said parking lot to buy a cold drink and a sandwich. And if you lay on your car horn past 9 p.m., it's against the law. So if you find yourself in Arkansas, this is what I want to encourage you to do. Get in your car, get there at 8:59 and just lay on your horn for 59 minutes, right? You're like, ha, 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 ha. And then go and get your cold drink and sandwich, right? Florida. If you live in Florida and you put a sign in your yard that says, beware of dog, and someone comes onto your property and your dog, no matter the size of the dog, bites that person, you know what? You're liable. They can sue you, but this is a real law. If that sign says, bad dog, your dog can bite people all day long. Serious. Beware of dog, you're liable. But if your sign says, no, my dog's bad, it's all on you. It's a real law. In Kentucky, like you can dye those little baby chicks, around Easter time. They're cute little baby chickens that are dyed different colors, right? It's only legal in Kentucky to sell dyed baby chicks if they're in 6-packs. Packs of 5, illegal. Packs of 7, illegal. You only want 1? Can't. They must be in 6-packs. It's a law. I don't know. Minnesota? You can grease a pig. You can. That's perfectly legal. You can grease a pig. I'm not saying why you would want to, but if you're like, I'm bored, I have a pig and I got some grease, I'm going to grease my pig, right? You can do that. You can even grease your pig and let your pig go running around the neighborhood. Perfectly legal. But if your intent is to grease a pig, let your pig go, and then you go chase that pig, it's against the law. You can't chase greased pigs in Minnesota. So if you find yourself in Minnesota with a greased pig, don't chase it. Don't chase it. It's against the law. And in Pennsylvania, if you find yourself out fishing, you're at this nice little creek, you're at a lake, and all of a sudden you find yourself there, and you're like, I can't wait to go fishing, and all of a sudden you realize, oh no, I forgot my fishing pole. What am I to do? And you choose in that moment. You had a moment of weakness. You didn't want to drive back home to get your fishing pole. You're like, I'm here, I'm ready. And you decide to go fishing, and you literally catch a fish with your mouth. It's illegal. Don't do it. If you're like, I want to go bobbing for fish today, forget the apples. I want to bob for a fish. It sounds like fun. It's illegal. Don't do it. I know all of you right now feel just this compulsion, like, I can't wait to go fishing with my mouth. All right, that's a challenge. You know, what if I get it in my teeth? Yum. It's illegal. And I'm thankful in Pennsylvania, this great state, that we can't catch fish. We can chase greased pigs. That's fine. No fishing with your mouth, right? Like, you think about these rules, like, we as just people, right? Like, we have rule after rule after rule after, it's a people issue. It's not so much a church issue or religion issue. And that's why Jesus took the 10 commandments and the 613 some odd Jewish laws, and he brought it down to 2. And I think he had one reason to bring it down to 2, one reason. Because when he says love God and love your neighbor, he knew someone was going to ask him, hey, Jesus, who's my neighbor? And I think that's why he brought it down to 2, because he wanted that question to be asked. And when Jesus was asked, who's my neighbor? You know what he answered? Anyone and everyone. There's no subcategory that you can slide a person into. No. When you love, it's anyone and everyone. And once he had defined neighbor, you know what he did? He brought them all down to one law, one command, one rule. Love everyone. As I have loved you, so you must love. Must. It's not optional. It's not if you feel like it. It's not if the person deserves it. You must love everyone. And that one command begs this question. What does love require of me? And that one question, what does love require of me, is going to help us figure out what it means to live like Jesus lived. Now we're going to look at some thoughts, some words from the Apostle Paul. And what I love about the Apostle Paul is so many times we read these, what we call books of the Bible, and we forget about, these are real people, real cities. Paul's a real person. And Paul's story is so important to us learning what it means to live like Jesus lived. Because Paul grew up in a denomination. He didn't call it a denomination, but he grew up in a denomination. It was the Jewish faith. He grew up going to synagogue. He grew up, obeying all the 10 commandments and there's some 613 laws. Not only did he grow up tethered to the law, his parents sent him to Jerusalem to study underneath one of the most famous rabbis ever. His name was Gamaliel. He had the best schooling. Paul became a Pharisee upon Pharisee. He was the expert of all Jewish law, the 10 commandments, the 613 laws. He was the best of the best. That's what he was tethered to. When Jesus intersected with his life, everything changed. So Paul realized, his life is similar to you. For some of you, you're still tethered back to a denominational framework. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just saying it's a real thing. You're still tethered back to some church denominational framework. And Paul gets it because that was Paul's life. But when Jesus intersected with Paul's life, everything shifted. And Paul helps us understand what it means to live like Jesus lived. And so he's writing these words to the church located in the ancient city of Ephesus. But these letters that he wrote to these churches actually didn't just stay in that city. They would pass these letters around to all these other churches in all these other cities. And this is what Paul wrote. He says, so I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live. And there's a key word, right? To live. He's telling us how to live like Jesus lived. To live as the Gentiles do. And that word Gentiles is basically anyone who's not a Jew. Remember, Paul was taking this message about Jesus, who was a Jew, out into the rest of the world. God used Paul. If not, the story about Jesus would have stayed self-contained into this Jewish culture, this Jewish nation. But Paul's taking it out to all these other cities. He goes, hey, You must no longer live as the Gentiles do. And we would expect the next thought to be some type of action. Because most rules, right, most religions, most denominations, right, there's rules, and the rules are attached to actions. But Paul doesn't write an action there. He goes, in the futility or the emptiness or the purposelessness of their thinking. And he starts right at the mind, not the action, to the mind. And over again, Paul does this. When he talks about how you're supposed to live, he starts with their mind. Well, then he's going to use 4 very kind of harsh words. But remember, he's describing how this group of people used to live in the culture that they were living. And he says this: they are darkened in their understanding. When what he's referring to is they're darkened from the truth. And remember, Jesus said that he was the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to God the Father except through Jesus. And Paul is saying, hey, they're darkened to their understanding of the truth, which Jesus is the truth. And he goes, and separated from the life of God. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to God except through Jesus. And so they're separated, and because they're separated, because they don't know Jesus, they're darkened. And then he goes, because of their ignorance. And he's not calling in question their IQ level. It wasn't an IQ thing. He was talking about the sin that lived within them. Why? Because they're separated and they're darkened. And then he says, due to the hardening or the petrification of their hearts. Why? Because they don't know Jesus. And for some of you, now, I named Jesus the subject of my life when I was 10 years old. I grew up in a Christian household. I've shared about this before. My parents really didn't grow up in a Christian household. It was very dysfunctional. But when Jesus intersected with my parents' lives, everything changed. And so I'm a benefit of them living out their faith. And so I've just known that. But for some of you, you remember that day when Jesus became the subject of your life and everything changed. And so you hear words like darkened and separated and ignorance, not IQ ignorance. Remember, it's attached to sin and hardening of your heart. Do you remember your life before Jesus? And some of these words, if not all these words, you're like, yeah, I remember that was my old way of life. That I used to be like that. I love when people say to me, Chris, before Jesus, I never cried. Now I cry like a baby. I'm like, yeah, you do. Why? Your heart was hard. Now God in you, like he's shaping and molding you. Like this is, that's a good thing. You're starting to feel what God feels and you're feeling for people, right? That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. Some of you just know what life was like before Jesus and what your life is like now. And that's what Paul is trying to paint this picture. Now he's going to turn the corner. It's going to be positive, but he's going to make one more. Well, this is what he writes. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity. So he gives this umbrella term, right? He could list it out every impurity, but he doesn't. He's like, I'm not going to list them all out. And here's the umbrella term, but he does separate out one. And I think it's fascinating. You got to ask the question, why does he give the umbrella term to every kind of impurity? But yet he still writes out full of greed. Paul knows there's something within all of us that's me-centric. This is mine. I've worked hard for this. I've put in the hours. I've earned the money. I'm going to choose how to leverage my capital. And there's something within all of us that we want to hold on to what we think is ours. But when Jesus intersects with your life, there's this thing called surrender that you have to let go of. And he goes, that was your former way of life. That's how you used to live. And then he turns the corner. Because that, however, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. Now, Paul's saying so much right here, and I want to highlight 2 very important parts of what he's saying here. The first one is this. When he writes, when you heard about Christ, he's not saying, hey, that one day where that traveling salesman came to town and he started to tell a story about this guy named Jesus that did this really cool thing. That's not what he's talking about when he writes, heard about Christ. What he's saying is, when you name Jesus the subject of your life, when Jesus became the Lord and leader and forgiver and friend of your life, when Jesus became the center of your life. That's what Paul means when you heard about Christ. He goes, hey, when Jesus became the center of your life, when he intersected with your life, when he became the subject of your life. Then he writes this fascinating Greek phrase, the life you learned. The literal translation is when you learned Christ. Learned Christ. Nowhere else in Greek writing is this idea or concept to learn a person. They can't find it anywhere. And Paul writes this fascinating phrase, but when you learned Christ, when he became the subject of your life. You see, Paul was removing the question mark of what it means to live like Jesus lived. He goes, when you lived differently, your old way, but when Jesus intersected with your life and you learned Christ, you started to live differently. And then he's going to paint a powerful picture of what it means to live differently. So he writes, you were taught with regard to your former way of life. Again, he's like, hey, just remember, there was before Jesus and now. How you used to live before Jesus was the subject of your life and now. And then he's going to give three very specific actions. Okay? The first action was this. He says, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted or is being polluted or it's rotting your soul. He goes, there's your old self. And when the old self was there, like it was your soul, the condition of your soul was polluted. It was rotting. It was corrupted. It was horrid. But it's this picture right here. Because when he wrote to put off, it was a physical action of taking off your outer garment. Now, when I walked onto stage a few moments ago and the lights came up and you all saw this glorious Dallas Cowboys jersey, I know you guys were in awe in the presence of America's team. I get it. But you know what Paul was saying? It's okay. You can clap. I actually had someone one service said, burn it. I'm like, so much hostility. But here's what we want to do. Okay, we're like, okay, Paul, I'm gonna take off my old self. But you know what we want to do? We want to fold it up and we want to put it on the shelf within arm's reach. We want to put it on the hanger and hang it back up in our closet and say, you know what? I took it off. But if I want to put it back on, I can. But it's not what Paul's saying. He's like, no. When you take off your old garment, you get rid of it. It's gone. Now you can clap. It's gone, right? Right? And it's a powerful image. When Jesus is a subject of your life, you live differently. Why? Because your old self, it's gone. Why? Because your old self was corrupting, polluting your soul. It's now gone. Then he gets to the second action. He goes, to be made new in the what? The attitude of your mind, the regeneration of your mind. Again, so many times we take these rules and we apply it to our outward actions. And what Paul was saying is, no. What happens in here will direct what happens out there. What happens in our minds will direct our actions out there. It all starts with our minds. That's why he wrote to the church in Philippi. He goes, let everything that's lovely and noble and admirable and praiseworthy, all these things, like think about those things. Is why he said to the church in Rome, he goes, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be what? Transformed by the renewing of our minds. It starts here, because what goes on within your mind will direct your actions out there. And then he gets to the third action. He goes, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. The first action is to get rid of your old self. But when Jesus is the subject of your life, you are a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come, and that's why you live differently. He says, guess what? You've gotten rid of your old, so it's time to put on your it burns. We need a moment of silence. It's okay, grown guys cry too. Okay. It is. It's good. The new self, it's so good. Right? But right, it changes everything. It changes everything. So when we think about living differently, again, for so many people, and maybe you fall into this, so many people, when you think about living your life in this Christian context, living differently, you tether that thought to live by the rules. And churches have done such a bad job because they've relegated living your life reflecting the heart of Christ by living by the rules. And what's interesting is Paul, throughout this whole section, Ephesians 4 and 5, you know what Paul does? Wrapping around what words we just looked at. You know what he writes down? A list of things you shouldn't do. I mean, these are the things you shouldn't do. But here's what happens. We lens through these moments in the Bible, things you shouldn't do. And if you're not careful, you're lensing them through, these are rules. Okay, here we go. Finally, Chris got to the rules of church. I knew those rules. Here we go. Here's the rules. And as soon as you start lensing through these moments in the Bible, Paul's like, hey, these are things you shouldn't do. And when you lens them through the rules, this is how you think. Deception. Okay. What really is a lie? I mean, Chris, there has to be, there's times where it's okay to lie. I'm not really going to tell that person the truth. You know what that would do in our relationships? You can't tell the truth about everything. I get the big things. You shouldn't lie about the big things. But there's always exceptions. There's always exceptions. Escape clause. Bitterness. Chris, I get we're supposed to love everyone first. And I'm going to put 99.9% in the love first category. But there's one person. And if I told you my story, Chris, if I told you my story, you would agree that one person can go in that one box. Because what he said, what she said, what they did to me, it's so horrendous that you would even agree, Chris. So yeah, 99.9% of all people, I will love them first. But this one person, and as soon as you put one person in that box, bitterness grows. And you know what happens? Bitterness. Once it grows, once it's attached to one person, it impacts every relationship. Obscenity, right? Okay, Chris, here we go. By the rules, what words can I say and can't I say? Okay, Chris, what words can I say on church property and off church property? And by the way, Chris, is the road leading to the church part of church property or not? Right, is the driveway, can I unleash? I was in our student ministry. I did student ministry for years, working with teenagers, loved it. And it was a weekend service. We had all these teenagers everywhere. And I heard one of our core students scream across a room, hey, I'm going to give you the bird. I'm like, is he really going to flip someone off at church? And right there, right, it kind of lenses itself to say, well, if you're not at church, you can flip people off. But in church, that's wrong, right? I'm just full confession here. And I turn around to the student, I'm like, what did you just say? And he right away realized what he said. He's like, no, Chris. I wasn't going to flip him off. I was going to give him the Christian bird. And as these words were coming out of my mouth, I was like going, Chris, don't ask the question. I go, what's the Christian bird? And he smiles. He does this. I'm like, what's that? He goes, it's a turkey. It's a Christian bird. I'm like, what? What? I don't know if you can do that in church or not in church. I'm pretty sure that's the same thing, but it's kind of funny now, right? Like, it's like, some of you are like, oh, the Christian bird. Chris said I can give people the turkey. I'm like, right? Remember, when we're lensing through the rules, right? This is what we do to the rules. Like, we're like, okay, I can't. Greed. Here's how, when you lens through the rules, this is how you hear greed. You're like, oh no, the pastor, Chris, he's talking about money and giving and church is the hope of the world and I should give. Okay, Chris, give me a percentage and I will determine if that percentage is too high or not. No, maybe, okay, I get that generosity is the only thing that can break greed, but I'm not really a greedy person, but now I feel guilty, so okay, I guess I'll give. How much? That's by the rules. Oh, we could go through all of these. That's by the rules. But Paul didn't write these to be rules. What's the one command Jesus gave? To love. And what does that one command, what's that one question it begs us to ask? What does love require of me? These weren't written for rules. Living differently isn't about living by the rules. It's about how we are to love people. And when you start lensing through these, hey, these are things you shouldn't do, through the lenses of how am I to love someone? What does love require of me? It shifts everything. Bitterness. When you put everyone in one box, not separate one person out and say, you know what, I'm going to love this person that has hurt me deep, that keeps hurting me, and I'm going to love them by putting up a boundary. To say, I'm not going to let you close unless you play by these relational rules because I'm tired of you hurting me. But I'm going to continue loving you. I'm going to love you and create boundaries. I'm going to love you and keep you at arm's distance until, and you start praying for them because you hope for the day where the relationship is restored. That doesn't create bitterness. Doesn't create bitterness. When you start realizing it's not about what words can I say or can I say, it's how do my words impact other people? Am I using my words to build people up, to encourage people, to point people to Jesus? Or are my words helping separate people from the love of God? How am I leveraging my words to love people? We start thinking about greed. It's not about, I guess I have to give to Jesus and the church is the hope of the world. How much? When you lens through love, your entire perspective on generosity and giving is, God, I can't outgive you because you gave your son to die for me. And I want to give back as much as I can because Jesus, I can never repay you. You see how it shifts everything. It's not about how little can I give and how guilty do I feel. It's God, I want to try to outgive you, but I can never outgive you because your son died for me, gave his life for me. And now, because Jesus is subject to my life, I'm going to live differently and I want everyone to know about Jesus. God, I'm going to give out of a generous spirit. Why? Because Jesus gave his life. Just telling you, it shifts everything. When you start looking at moments like this, it's not about what you can and can't do. It's all about what does love require of me? A new command, to love everyone. Why? Because Jesus loved you and Jesus loved me. And then Paul wrote these words. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love. Put off your old self. Renew your mind. Put on your new self. And that's walking in the way of love, that you're going to live differently. Because Jesus loved you. And where does it start? It starts right here. Because what happens in here, in your mind, will direct what happens out there. Now, for some of you, you're thinking to yourself, okay, Chris. I get it. I'm supposed to love. I'm supposed to live differently. But your next thought is this. But I can't be perfect. God doesn't expect me to be perfect. And you're right. God does not expect you to be perfect. But as soon as you go there mentally, you know what you're doing? You're developing another escape clause. God, I can't be perfect, so I can do whatever I want. Yes. God doesn't expect perfection. You know what he does expect? Your pursuit. To live a life. To learn Christ. To live differently. Why? Well, that's what Jesus said. The new command I give you is to love everyone as I have loved you, so you must love everyone. Why? So everyone will know Jesus. I was at a church in Vegas for years, and most people know Las Vegas, Sin City, and we actually called it Grace City. And we had this saying, it's okay not to be okay. And it kind of became a rallying cry for our church. I mean, across all of our locations, it was like, it's okay not to be okay. In the midst of Sin City, Grace City, right? People that were just broken coming in, and for the very first time feeling God's love and his grace, his acceptance. And it's powerful. But what we realized were people were using that as a rallying cry, but stopping there. And we realized that, well, there's more to that phrase. And so we added a powerful addition to that phrase. It's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay there. Your pursuit to love like Jesus loved and to live like Jesus lived. And those two together are going to help us remove the question mark on what it means to lead like Jesus led.